The first reading today is from Song of Songs, chapter 5, verses 1 through 8. I have come to my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh and my spices. I have eaten my honeycomb with my honey. I have drunk my wine and my milk. Eat, dear friends, drink, and get drunk on love. I was sleeping, but my heart was awake, a sound. My love is knocking. Open for me, my sister, my dearest, my dove, my perfect one. My head is soaked with dew, my hair with the night mist. I have taken off my tunic, why should I put it on again? I have bathed my feet, why should I get them dirty? My love put his hand in through the latch hole, and my body ached for him. I rose, I went to open for my love, and my hands dripped myrrh, my fingers liquid myrrh, over the handles of the lock. I went and opened for my love, but my love had turned, gone away. I nearly died when he turned away. I looked for him, but couldn't find him. I called out to him, but he didn't answer me. They found me, the guards, who make their rounds in the cities. They struck me, bruised me. They took my shawl away from me, those guards of the city walls. I place you under oath, daughters of Jerusalem. If you find my love, what should you tell him? That I am weak with love. The second reading is from 1 Corinthians, chapter 6, verses 12 through 20. I have the freedom to do anything, but not everything is helpful. I have the freedom to do anything, but I won't be controlled by anything. Food is for the stomach, and stomach is for food. And yet God will do away with both. The body isn't for sexual immorality, but the Lord. And the Lord is for the body. God has raised the Lord and will raise us through his power. Don't you know that your bodies are part of Christ? So then, should I take parts of Christ and make them a part of someone who is sleeping around? No way. Don't you know that anyone who is joined to someone who is sleeping around is one body with that person? The scripture says the two will become one flesh. The one who is joined to the Lord is one spirit with him. Avoid sexual immorality. Every sin that a person can do is committed outside the body, except those who engage in sexual immorality commit sin against their own bodies. Or don't you know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you? Don't you know that you have the Holy Spirit from God and you don't belong to yourselves? You have been bought and paid for, so honor God with your body.
The last reading comes from Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 through 30. This is Jesus in the Beatitudes expounding upon the law. You have heard that it was said, don't commit adultery. But I say to you that every man who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in his heart. And if your right eye causes you to fall into sin, tear it out and throw it away. It's better that you lose a part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to fall into sin, chop it off and throw it away. It's better that you lose a part of your body than your whole body go into hell. A light exposition from Jesus. What did you learn about sex from the church growing up? What? It's bad? Okay. What else? Only in marriage. Okay? That pretty much summated it? It's bad and only in marriage?
It's a blessing to a committed relationship.
It's a blessing to a committed relationship.
I should respect myself.
You should respect yourself. Anything else? How often have you heard sex talked about in church? Never. In confirmation. Yep, it was probably in a confirmation or youth group setting if you heard anything at all. Or marriage classes, or premarital counseling classes, sure. And the message generally was, don't. Unless you're married. And then it's fine. So why is the church so bad at talking about something that is so vital to human beings? They're embarrassed. I won't do a show of hands of who's uncomfortable even talking about this right now. Here's some facts for you. Humans were created as sexual beings. And if we believe that humans were created by God, which I believe, then the fact that we're sexual beings is a part of our good creation by God. So why are we so uncomfortable with it? Because it's intimate. It's intimate. Yeah. Very personal. Yeah. I think the church has gotten this wrong maybe more than anything else in its history. And I think we see the repercussions of that all the time in church scandals. So I grew up 80s and 90s. I graduated high school in 1995. What was the message in Christianity in the early 90s to the late 90s? Anyone know? Purity culture. Does that ring a bell to anybody? There was a book that came out called I Kissed Dating Goodbye. And there was this whole shift. What's that? I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Yeah. And there was this whole shift away from dating and to kind of this courtship marriage model where people got married really young, like, late teens, early 20s. And they never really dated. They just kind of found someone and they got married, and usually their first kiss was on their wedding day. I went to weddings like that, and let me tell you, there is nothing on this earth more awkward than watching two people kiss for the first time. Nothing. And that everyone knows that they've never kissed, who's there and is watching it. I was way more uncomfortable then than I am now. So there was this whole movement, this purity culture movement. Now, here's the problem. Here's how that message was set up. And you can go on, you can Google old youth group stuff from that time and how it was talked about. Usually boys and girls were split up. It was never talked about together. I kind of missed all of this in the church I was in. This wasn't a part of kind of my church practice, but it was out there, and it was very, very prevalent. So they would separate the boys and the girls out, and the boys were taught, don't have sex before marriage. And you want to marry a virgin. That's the goal. You want to find a virgin to marry, and that's your goal. Don't have sex outside of marriage. That was pretty much the messaging. To the girls, the messaging was, don't have sex before marriage. If you do mess up and have sex before marriage, you are tainted forever. No one will ever want you because you are filthy and dirty. And there were horrible things like they would take a cup of water and pass it around and everyone would spit in it. This is youth group stuff. You can look it up. And then at the end they would go, and this is what you're like if you have sex before marriage. Or chewed gum. That was another popular one. And they would tell the girls that they have to dress modestly because men can't control themselves, and they can tempt them to fall into sin if they wear something too revealing, or if, God forbid, you acknowledge that they have a body, the men will just lose themselves. And if you are assaulted, the questions asked of you are going to be, well, what were you wearing? And what did you do? What messages were you sending? And very little questioning of the man. So, we are still reaping the benefits of that mindset in the church. But that was the predominant teaching in the early and late 90s. Fun fact, the person who wrote that book, I Kissed Gating Goodbye, has since publicly apologized and left Christianity. He says it's the worst thing he ever did, was write that book. So we're bad at this in the church. So the question was asked, what is a healthy biblical sexuality? Is there one that we can, kind of take out of the biblical text? You heard three passages. One was from the Song of Songs, which is a love letter back and forth between the king and one of his lovers. Side note, he had like 700 wives and 1,000 concubines? So we don't know which one, but it was between one of them. If you hear anyone say that that is an allegory about God and the church, they're lying to you and they're real uncomfortable about sex. So you had that reading. You had Paul's take on it about sexual immorality. And remember, Paul, best case scenario, you're celibate, you never marry, and you do the work of the kingdom because Jesus is coming back in his lifetime, and there's no time for that. You got to stay focused. But if you can't control yourself, get married if you have to. That's how Paul taught. And then you have Jesus expounding upon the Ten Commandments and talking about adultery. Notice when Jesus is talking, he's only talking to one group of people. Anyone catch that? Men. Women are not being addressed. Just men. I don't think that's a coincidence. So what does sexual immorality mean? When that term is used, what does that even mean? What do you think? What do you think Paul's talking about? What is sexual immorality? We put a lot of emphasis on what it might mean from different perspectives. What do you think it means? Coveting, so wanting someone else's spouse or anyone, okay?
I mean, it's more than that.
Well, it's kind of what Jesus was talking about, right? Lusting after people. Anything else? Abuse. Yeah. Abusing another person. I think that's vital in our understanding of this. I think, like it's come up many, many, many times, we try to reduce things to a to-do list or a not-to-do list. And I think we've done that with sex, maybe more than anything else. Don't do it before marriage. Do it in marriage. And then it's wonderful. But you're not allowed to think about it before you're married or know anything about it. But then you're supposed to just magically know everything. Who you do it with, right? That's a big one, and how people answer that. It's fine between male and female married couples. It's not fine between everyone else, right? So we do that to-do list or a to-not-do list. And I don't think that's what it's talking about. I think it goes back to how we understand power. Sexual immorality happens when there is power used against someone else, or someone else is reduced to an object. They're no longer human, they're just an object for you to use. I think that's what they're talking about with sexual immorality. Because you have to remember, our concept of marriage does not exist in the Bible. In fact, our concept of marriage didn't exist until very, very recent in human history. How did people get married in the Bible? Their family set it up. The girl got her period. She was ready to have kids. The family set up a marriage that was beneficial to both families. And boom, they're married. In fact, in biblical times, the only value a girl had to the family was the fact that she could be married into another family, and that would be beneficial to the father. Because there's an exchange. They didn't have a say in it. They didn't get to go, oh, I don't like him. When they're talking marriage, that's what they're talking about. They didn't meet and fall in love and decide to get married and plan a wedding and ask their friends to stand up with them, have a big party. There was a big party for 3 days. They weren't a part of it because they were ushered to a tent where they had to consummate the marriage for it to be official and hopefully produce a male heir or a male child. No pressure. Our world is very different than that world. There wasn't a big gap between when someone's hormones went wild and when they were married off and having sex. It happened pretty fast. That's not how it is anymore. I hope you don't want 14-year-olds getting married. Please don't want 14-year-olds getting married. But you might not get married till your early or mid-30s or later. Do we reasonably expect someone to abstain from the age of 13 or 14, maybe 20 or 30 years? Our bodies are not built for that. They're not. But if we focus on the what to do and what not to do, that's where we end up. There can be sexual immorality in marriages, just between the two people. If the woman's reduced to an object that's there to satisfy the man, there's a whole lot of sexual immorality there. And yet, in that purity culture mindset that is still out there and present, that is the woman's sole role. Because if she's not available for sex for her husband, then he will stray and it will be her fault. Which, side note, I am a male. I get real offended by this idea that men are these incapable apes that can't control themselves. That's garbage. But it does create a great breeding ground for sexual assault. So what's healthy sexuality in the Bible? If, and I believe this to be true, if God created us as sexual beings, because if God didn't want us to be sexual beings, sex could have been purely procreative. We have plenty of examples of that in nature. We could have been created that way. There's no enjoyment of it. It's just something you do to make more of us. But that's not how we are. It's pleasurable. Our brains release a hormone that's the love hormone. The same chemical released when you have a baby to bond the mother and child is released when you orgasm. So it could have been different, but God created us like this. So what is healthy sexuality? Here's my opinion. Take it, don't. I think it all boils down to power. I think healthy sex can exist between any couple. I also think sexual immorality can exist between any couple based on how power is used. If you're in a loving relationship and committed to one another, sex should be a beautiful part of that. I don't think it's to be used lightly either. Because Paul references Genesis where it says the two flesh become one, and those hormones do exist in our brains and are released that do cause us to bond with another person. So I don't think we can be really flippant about it. I think it's really important and sacred. So I don't think we should just use it lightly. But I also don't think it's reasonable for people to abstain for decades. I don't think our bodies are created that way. I know some pastors who won't marry people who are living together. Don't know how they marry anyone anymore, because just about everyone lives together first. Erin and I lived together before we got married. I was in Ohio, she was in Illinois. We were going to get married, and it made no sense for me to move to Illinois and get a separate place. We didn't have the money for that. I don't think we were living in sin, as you might call it. The church has to get better at this, because the messages being received are toxic in a lot of churches. And we have to lose our, apprehension of talking about these things, our embarrassment, all of those things, because the messages being sent out are still in that purity culture, and it's still creating these breeding grounds for abuse. Read stories all the time about these pastors or leaders who fall because of abuse. And you find out that, boy, there was this whole pattern of abuse for years and years and years and years. And they were protected because the ministry was too important. If what you're doing is destroying lives, there is no ministry that you're doing. We have to reclaim in the creation story that we were created and God called it good. And the fact that sin and death entered creation doesn't eliminate that. This is one of my biggest beefs with John Calvin. I have several. Here's one of them. This total depravity of man. We are incapable of doing anything good on our own. It is only through the Spirit that we can do anything good. I don't think that's true. I see a lot of people in this world who claim no faith in anything, who are out there doing good things. I tend to believe that that's a sign of us being created in the image of God with characteristics that God has instilled in us to want to do for others, to do good things, to see others flourish. And I think the same is true with how we talk about and understand sex in the church, how we teach it. You have to start talking to younger people about it. Don't let them figure it out on their own. Someone asked me 2 weeks ago when we talked about this in Bible study, kind of what I want for my kids. And thinking about that, what I want for my kids is I don't want any of the shame that came with purity culture to touch any of their understanding of themselves or their bodies or what sex is. I don't want any of that for them. I don't want them for a minute to think of their bodies as dirty. I want them to understand that their bodies are a gift from God. And that sex is beautiful and sacred. I don't want either of them to think, well, if I do this, this person will like me or will love me. I don't want that for them. I want them to choose when and with whom based on deeply loving somebody. I'm less concerned about the marriage part first. Also realistic. Shame has been this big, loud mouthpiece of the church for way too long. Now, difference between guilt and shame. My CPE supervisor in residency at the hospital taught me this. I'd never thought about it. Guilt is not a bad thing because it usually is an internal something that says, you kind of did something wrong there, and maybe you need to make amends for it. So feeling guilty is not necessarily a bad thing. It's kind of highlighting maybe something you need to address. Shame is something others lay upon you that have nothing to do with anything you did. And a lot of times it's put on who you are. Your very being is shameful. And that has a lasting effect. I was looking at someone who posted on a podcast talking about this and comments from women who grew up in purity culture, who had been married for decades, who still struggled with intimacy. Because their internal dialogue that was given to them was that they were dirty if they did this. So there's no switch to flip just because you get married. We need to embrace this huge part of our being, the way God created us, and honor it, because it could have been different. Also, we have to stop letting others alienate whole people groups because they're not fitting their to-do or to not-do list. I don't think that's what it's talking about. Your thoughts on all this? Questions or thoughts? Everyone's very... Carol.
What about the hookup culture that we see today?
Yeah, the hookup culture. I don't think that's good for anybody. Because I think it takes something that's sacred and beautiful and treats it like it's not. And I think it causes a lot of damage. And I think a lot of it is driven by seeing another person as an object, a means to an end. And I think that's what it's talking about when it says sexual immorality. You've reduced someone else to an object. You're just interested in what you want out of it, and I don't think that's healthy. I don't see a way that that's a healthy view of it. Just.
Do you think there's a particular way to address the like when they, I feel like
Yeah.
That, like, how do they, I feel like, so the formal I still think of it at the same time as, like, historically.
Yep.
However, I feel like maturity-wise, the way we raise kids and choose to have kids, that they maybe it takes longer to get to certain levels of mental maturity.
Yeah. So how do you talk about kids when the way we raise them and how our culture is structured, it takes a long time to get to maturity now. Here's maybe the weirdest part of how we were created. So puberty hits, you're 12 to 14, somewhere in there. Our brains aren't fully developed till we're 26 years old. You know that's why fighter pilots and soldiers are great for a 6-year stint, 18 to 24. Because then your brain kicks in and you start weighing consequence. And you're like, well, if I run out there and they're shooting at me, there's a good chance I'm getting shot. I don't want to get shot. An 18-year-old will just run. The brain's not fully developed. So I think in talking about it, especially to kids who are hitting that puberty point, it's being open to their questions. It's being open to explaining how bodies work in a real way. You know, don't use stupid words for body parts. Just call them what they are. You know. Understanding that they're going to explore their body, and that's a natural part of it, and that's fine. But I think it's keeping a line of communication open as they change and as they hear stuff. But they should be hearing stuff from us and learning from us and not finding out about it in the wilderness. I think that's really important. So just being open to talking about it, kind of as they have questions. Yeah.
Yeah, give you voice of experience. You want to get over being embarrassed talking to teenagers? Work with youth group and confirmation for a few years, and you get over it real quick. You can talk to any teenagers about anything. The other thing that I think we sometimes forget is the difference between sexuality and sex. Those are whole different words.
Yes. Yeah, so if you want to practice on talking, come to confirmation or youth group. Those are great. You can also go work in an ICU for a while. It's great to get you over any embarrassment of anything. But the difference between sex and sexuality is really important. Sexuality is a part of who we are. It's not a choice. It's my biggest gripe about people who are anti-LGBTQIA plus people, and they say it's a lifestyle choice. Have you ever talked to anyone who is going through internal turmoil and at times thinks, it would be better for me to be dead than to be like how I am? It's not a choice. They're not choosing it.
I know my nephew, when I was talking to him once, he said, do you think anybody would choose this?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard, you're shunned, you have graffiti put on your walls outside and such. It's not a choice that I would take.
Right. Her nephew said, do you think anyone would choose this? Called names, there's graffiti on your locker, no one would choose this. The other thing I like to say is, well, when did you choose, if I'm talking to a straight male, when did you choose to like women? When presented with the options, when did you choose that? You never did. You just liked women. Same goes for everybody. So our sexuality is a part of our being. It's a part of who we are. Not separate and dirty. This is where Paul, I think, is off base. And we're getting a lot of Paul's baggage. It's an integral part of who we are. And it should be. It's how we were created. So yes, differentiate between sex and sexuality. Talk about the sexuality part first. The part that they're experiencing kind of open up in puberty. That it's a natural, good part of themselves. Get to the sex part later.
As a parent educator, one of the things I really talked to parents about was the fact that your brain doesn't, and it's not really fully developed.
Yeah.
And it opened eyes, and they thought about it, and it made sense that how can we expect kids and young adults to make totally responsible decisions when they can't yet.
Yep.
And also, I think we need to help our kids know that I know you're really smart and your brain is really growing. It's not done growing yet. And you're going to change your opinions on things, and you're going to grow and learn more.
Yeah.
So respect that too.
Yeah. She was talking about peer mentoring, talking to parents about the brain development and how they're not thinking rationally, and they can't think rationally, and they can't think through everything, and they're going to be irrational. And that's just the way it is. Here's the other part that we need to reclaim. Susie.
I mean, just like we have these huge hormonal changes between 14 and 26, we keep having them the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
So any assumption that what you decided at 20 is going to be the same thing that you're feeling at 50 is ridiculous. So I think that around sexuality in our culture, we need more of an openness and an honesty and a questioning. Because even if you're with a partner, as long as you're communicating honestly, you're going to be able to grow and find what you need without change.
Yeah. Yeah. We change throughout our lives. Puberty is not the end of it. Hormones change throughout our lives. So being open and honest about that, and that things will change for us over the course of our lives. That's a natural part of being a human. Yeah. Here's the other part we need to really, really re-embrace. So let's say your kid comes to you and says, I messed up. What do you say?
Tell me about it.
Yeah. Tell me about it. What?
I love you anyway.
Yeah. I love you anyway. How about the just I love you? Yeah. We need to reclaim this concept of grace when it comes to sex. Because for how it's been taught, there is no grace. If you mess up once, you're tainted forever. That is not a biblical teaching. In fact, that throws out all of Jesus' teachings. You are now under the law again. You broke the law and you're punished under the law. That is not what Jesus taught. There is grace and grace and grace, no matter how many times we screw up, which might be a lot. There is grace, and we need to reclaim that.
I think you need to show the grace with your body language too. So much is said in your body language. But the study your jaw or the look in your eyes, or you need to show them that you still love them.
Yeah. Yeah, so show them. Our body language tells a story. Absolutely. Here's the sex talk I got repeatedly from my mom. My mom was a teen mom, so just remember that. So the thing she didn't want for us was to be in the same situation. She would always say, I don't regret anything. However, it made life really hard. And I don't want that for you guys. And she said that a lot over the course of growing up. And hey, it worked. All three of us, no teen parents. We were all in our 30s. Maybe it worked too well. I don't know. But what she experienced being a teen mom in 1977 was not good. Her mom was disgusted with her, wanted to kind of send her away. She was forced to kind of marry my dad, because that's what you do. You're pregnant, marry this person. Well, that did not go well. Long term. So don't fall into the same traps. When I switched my majors and went from cellular and molecular biology to biblical studies, because I was out for a year and had surgery twice and got interested in that. So I was like, well, I've done all my prereqs. I can still go to medical school, change my major, and got involved in that. I ended up at a small kind of conservative Christian college on the north side of Chicago. And it was a whole different world. People would just like go away for the summer and come back married after their freshman year. It's bizarre. But removing that pressure, the only way to explore this part of you is to get married. I don't think we can put that burden on people. It's not healthy. And it creates marriages that happen for the wrong reasons. I don't know why the divorce rate's upwards around 65%. Maybe we're going into marriages for the wrong things. We have to reduce or just remove the stigma around it. Learn to talk about it. And talk against the things you hear still coming out of churches. Women are worth more than just being a sexual servant to their husbands. Men can control themselves. Sex is beautiful in the right situation. Sex can also be almost eternally traumatic. Last thoughts on this. This is just another one of the things that we gotta get over talking about. All right.